Sarah Okafor, a 32-year-old fashion designer from Lagos, Nigeria, had always believed in the idea of a perfect love story. From a young age, she was surrounded by tales of love that were meant to last a lifetime. However, her personal experiences didn't reflect the fairy tales she had been raised on. She had been through several relationships, each ending in heartbreak, betrayal, or disappointment. Despite the setbacks, Sarah held on to the hope that true love was still out there for her. As she grew older, Sarah poured most of her energy into her career. She built a name for herself in the Nigerian fashion industry, becoming a successful designer with her own boutique. But despite her professional achievements, her personal life still felt incomplete. The loneliness became more apparent during quiet evenings, where she found herself longing for companionship. She yearned for a partner to share her life with, someone who would appreciate her for who she was and offer the kind of emotional support she craved. Sarah's busy lifestyle made it difficult to meet someone organically. So, after some internal reflection and encouragement from her friends, she decided to try something new. One evening, she sat down and created a profile on an online dating platform, one that connected people from across different African countries. It wasn't an easy decision. Sarah had always been cautious of online relationships, but she told herself that love often required taking risks. It didn't take long before Sarah received a message from Kwami, a 38-year-old businessman from Accra, Ghana. Kwami's profile was eye-catching. He was tall with a muscular build, and his photos showed a man who appeared both sophisticated and adventurous. In his bio, he described himself as someone who loved traveling, fine dining, and spending time with his family. His words seemed thoughtful and genuine, which immediately caught Sarah's attention. As they began chatting, Kwami's messages were filled with charm and warmth. He complimented Sarah not just on her looks, but on her intelligence and career success. "It's not often I meet a woman as driven as you," he would say, and his admiration felt sincere. Kwami wasn't just a smooth talker, he seemed genuinely interested in Sarah's life, her passions, and her dreams. Over time, their conversations shifted from small talk to deeper, more personal topics. They shared stories about their families, their past relationships, and their hopes for the future. Kwami told Sarah about his thriving import-export business, which required him to travel frequently across Africa and Europe. His success made him financially comfortable, and his lifestyle reflected that. He lived in a luxurious apartment and drove a sleek car. But what really made him stand out to Sarah was his humility despite his wealth. He often mentioned how important family was to him and how he longed to settle down with the right woman. Kwami's attention made Sarah feel special, and soon her initial reservations about online dating faded. The idea of meeting someone like him, a man who seemed to have it all together, was thrilling. Kwami's frequent and thoughtful messages built a sense of closeness that Sarah hadn't felt in a long time. He was attentive, always checking in on her throughout the day, making her feel like she was his priority. Their connection deepened quickly, and it wasn't long before Sarah started to feel like she was falling for Kwami. As the weeks went by, Sarah and Kwami's online relationship blossomed into something that felt incredibly real, despite the physical distance between them. They texted each other every day, exchanged voice messages, and even had video calls that lasted for hours. During these calls, Kwami would often talk about his dreams of finding a life partner. "I want a woman who understands me, who's ready to build a future together," he'd say, and Sarah found herself nodding in agreement. It was like they were on the same page in terms of their desires for a relationship. Kwami wasn't like the other men Sarah had dated in the past. He didn't just flatter her with empty compliments or superficial gestures. Instead, he was attentive and consistent, always remembering the little things she mentioned in their conversations, her favorite color, the challenges she faced at work, or even the name of her childhood pet. These thoughtful details made Sarah feel seen and appreciated in ways she hadn't experienced before. Their romance began to feel like something out of a dream. Kwami was always quick to remind Sarah of how much he cherished her. He'd say things like, "You're the woman I've been searching for all my life," or "I can't wait for the day when we're finally together in person." His words painted a picture of a future filled with happiness, and Sarah found herself becoming more invested in the idea of them as a couple. She started imagining what her life could be like if things worked out with Kwami. Despite her growing feelings, there were moments when Sarah hesitated. She knew that online relationships could be tricky, and the fact that they hadn't met in person yet was always in the back of her mind. However, Kwami seemed so genuine that it was hard to doubt him. He wasn't pressuring her for anything and always respected her boundaries. He also made sure to reassure her constantly, saying that he was serious about their relationship and that he saw a future with her. As Sarah's feelings for Kwami grew stronger, her friends became concerned. They had noticed how quickly things were progressing and felt it was important to remind her of the potential dangers of online relationships, especially with someone living in another country. Amaka, her best friend, was particularly vocal. "Sarah, you don't know this guy. You've never even met him in person," Amaka warned. "What if he's not who he says he is?" Sarah understood where her friends were coming from, but she found it difficult to take their concerns seriously. Kwami hadn't shown any signs of deceit. In fact, he had been nothing but generous. A few months into their relationship, Kwami started sending her small gifts, flowers, perfumes, and even a beautiful handbag. He also transferred money to her occasionally, insisting that he just wanted to spoil her because she deserved it. To Sarah, this was a sign of Kwami's sincerity. If he was willing to go to such lengths, surely he wasn't trying to scam her. Kwami's proposal didn't come as a complete surprise. They had been talking about their future for months, and he had hinted several times that he was ready to settle down. When he finally asked her to marry him, Sarah's heart soared. But there was one catch. Kwami wanted Sarah to come to Ghana to meet him in person before they could start planning the wedding. It was a big ask. Sarah had never traveled outside Nigeria before, and the thought of going to a foreign country alone was intimidating. Amaka and her other friends were quick to point out how risky this could be. "What if something goes wrong? What if he's not the person you think he is?" they questioned. But Kwami had never once pressured her for anything. He had been patient, respectful, and loving, so Sarah couldn't see any reason not to trust him. Ignoring the warnings of her friends, Sarah made up her mind. She had fallen in love, and sometimes love required taking bold steps. After all, she reasoned, life was too short to let fear hold her back. Sarah's decision to visit Ghana marked a pivotal moment in her life. It wasn't just about meeting Kwami, it was about following her heart and taking a leap of faith. The idea of finally being with Kwami in person filled her with excitement. She imagined what it would be like to see him face to face, to hold his hand, and to begin planning their life together. In the days leading up to her trip, Sarah's emotions were a whirlwind of anticipation and anxiety. She prepared meticulously for her journey, packing her best outfits and carefully choosing gifts to bring for Kwami. She even spent hours researching Accra, familiarizing herself with the city's landmarks and culture. Kwami, for his part, reassured her that everything would go smoothly. He had already arranged for her stay at his luxurious apartment and had planned a series of special events to welcome her to Ghana. Yet, beneath the excitement, there was a small voice in the back of Sarah's mind reminding her of the risks. She had seen enough stories on the news about people getting deceived in online relationships, but whenever the doubts crept in, she pushed them aside. Kwami had done nothing to make her distrust him. He had been transparent, supportive, and loving. This, Sarah told herself, was her chance at happiness. Finally, the day came. With her bags packed and her heart full of hope, Sarah boarded the plane to Accra, ready to start what she believed would be the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She was taking a leap of faith, convinced that love was worth the risk. Once Sarah arrived in Accra, her excitement was at its peak. She stepped off the plane, expecting to be greeted by Kwami at the airport. However, to her surprise, Kwami wasn't there. Instead, he sent a driver, claiming that he had an important business meeting that he couldn't reschedule. Although Sarah was slightly disappointed, she brushed off her concerns, believing that Kwami's busy lifestyle was just part of his entrepreneurial success. She reassured herself that they would soon be together. The drive to Kwami's apartment was smooth, and the city of Accra, with its bustling streets and beautiful landmarks, was more vibrant than she had imagined. When she arrived at the apartment, it was just as luxurious as Kwami had described. It was located in an upscale neighborhood with sleek modern furnishings and a stunning view of the city. Kwami had even left a bouquet of roses and a note on the dining table, apologizing for his absence and promising to see her soon. Sarah settled in, eager to finally meet Kwami face to face. However, hours passed, and there was no sign of him. When she called, he gave more excuses. He was stuck in meetings, but he assured her they would meet the next day. day. Though she felt disappointed, Sarah tried to be patient. After all, Kwami had always been caring and thoughtful, and she trusted him. But this pattern continued for the next few days. Every time they were supposed to meet, something came up and Sarah began to feel uneasy. In her heart, Sarah started to sense that something wasn't quite right. She had traveled all this way to be with Kwami, but he was nowhere to be found. Her friends back home, particularly Amaka, were worried. "This doesn't feel right, Sarah," Amaka said over the phone. But Sarah was still holding on to the hope that everything would work out, convinced that Kwami was just dealing with business matters. After a few days in Accra without seeing Kwami, things took an unexpected turn. Kwami finally called Sarah, but this time his voice carried a tone of distress. He explained that he was in the middle of a serious business crisis. One of his business deals, involving a shipment from Europe, had gone awry due to a banking issue, and he needed a large sum of money to fix it. "It's just a temporary problem," he reassured Sarah. "I'll get the money back soon, but I need your help." Sarah was taken aback. Kwami had never mentioned financial difficulties before. He had always presented himself as a successful businessman living a life of luxury. Now he was asking her for money, a significant amount. He was careful to explain that it wasn't a gift. He would pay her back as soon as his funds were released. "You're the only one I trust, Sarah," Kwami said. "I wouldn't ask if I didn't need your help." Sarah's heart sank. She didn't know what to do. On one hand, she had grown close to Kwami and wanted to help him. On the other hand, this request felt strange. Wasn't Kwami supposed to be financially stable? And why was he asking her, someone he had never met in person, for such a large sum? Despite her misgivings, Sarah wanted to believe in Kwami. She reasoned that in relationships, trust was key, and this was just one of those moments where she needed to show her support. She was also deeply emotionally invested by this point, and the idea of Kwami being in trouble made her feel compelled to assist him. So, after some hesitation, she agreed to transfer the money. Sarah's decision to help Kwami marked a turning point in their relationship. She wired him the money, convinced that this was just a temporary setback. But after the transfer, Kwami's behavior began to change. He became harder to reach, his responses grew shorter, and his affectionate messages faded. When Sarah asked him about the business crisis, he always had a new excuse. Another problem had come up, and now he needed even more money to resolve it. The more Kwami asked, the more Sarah began to feel trapped. She had already invested so much emotionally and financially, and she didn't want to believe that Kwami was using her. Her pride and her heart made it difficult for her to walk away. Instead, she continued to send him money, each time hoping it would be the last request. Sarah started lying to her friends and family about her situation. She couldn't bear the thought of them saying, "I told you so." She wanted to believe that everything would work out and that Kwami was still the man she had fallen for. But deep down, doubt was creeping in. She began to feel isolated, ashamed, and anxious. Her dream of a perfect romance was unraveling, and yet she felt powerless to stop it. As the weeks passed, Sarah's bank account began to dwindle. She had sent Kwami more money than she could afford, and now she was facing serious financial consequences. Kwami's promises of repayment never materialized, and Sarah was left feeling more and more desperate. One day, after nearly a month of being in Accra and still not meeting Kwami in person, Sarah reached a breaking point. She couldn't continue living in denial. The reality of the situation finally hit her. Kwami had been scamming her all along. She had fallen for a well-crafted online romance scam, one that preyed on her loneliness and desire for love. Heartbroken and financially drained, Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of betrayal. Everything Kwami had told her, the sweet words, the dreams of a future together, had all been a lie. She realized that the luxurious apartment she had been staying in wasn't even his. It had been rented, likely with money from other victims like her. The weight of her mistakes crushed Sarah, leaving her feeling humiliated and lost. She couldn't understand how she had been so blind, how she had ignored all the red flags. The fairy tale she had built in her mind had crumbled into pieces, and now she was left to pick up the shards of her broken heart and shattered life. Returning to Lagos was one of the hardest things Sarah had ever done. She felt ashamed, not just because of the financial loss, but because of the emotional toll the experience had taken on her. She had been deceived in the worst way, and now she had to face her friends and family, who had warned her all along. Amaka and the others welcomed her back with open arms, but the guilt and embarrassment Sarah felt were immense. In the weeks that followed, Sarah struggled to rebuild her life. The financial losses had been significant, and she had to borrow money from her family to pay off her debts. But the emotional scars were even deeper. She had to come to terms with the fact that she had been manipulated and exploited by someone she trusted. The experience left her feeling vulnerable and unsure of herself. Despite the pain, Sarah knew she couldn't let this define her. With the support of her friends and family, she slowly started to regain her confidence. She threw herself back into her work, focusing on her fashion business as a way to distract herself from the emotional wounds. But she also realized that she needed to address the deeper issue, the part of her that had been so eager to believe in a fantasy. Sarah began seeing a therapist to help her process the trauma of the scam. Through therapy, she learned to forgive herself for the mistakes she had made. She realized that her desire for love and companionship had clouded her judgment, but that didn't mean she was unworthy of real, genuine love. It would take time, but Sarah was determined to heal and move forward. Despite everything that had happened, Sarah was determined not to let her past define her future. After returning to Lagos and starting therapy, she realized that she needed to take control of her life and rebuild her sense of self-worth. Though the betrayal had left her feeling broken, Sarah decided that she would not let Kwami's deceit be the end of her story. Her therapist helped her understand that it was normal to feel hurt, embarrassed, and even angry, but Sarah needed to channel those emotions into something positive. She began focusing more on her fashion business, using it as an outlet for her creativity and a way to regain her independence. It was through this renewed focus on her career that Sarah started to see a glimmer of hope for her future. Her work became a source of pride and accomplishment, and slowly but surely, Sarah started to feel like herself again. She stopped blaming herself for being deceived, realizing that Kwami had targeted her vulnerabilities. Her friends, especially Amaka, continued to offer their support, reminding her that she was strong and capable of overcoming this challenge. Sarah also began to share her story with others, hoping that by doing so, she could prevent someone else from falling into the same trap. It wasn't easy to talk about her experience, but it gave her a sense of purpose. She started raising awareness about romance scams, speaking openly about the dangers of online relationships and how scammers prey on people's emotions. This act of sharing her experience with others helped her heal and gave her the strength to move forward. As Sarah's healing journey progressed, she couldn't ignore the impact that the scam had on her ability to trust others. Her relationship with Kwami had shattered her faith in love and left her feeling wary of people's intentions. Every time she tried to open up to someone new, she found herself questioning their sincerity, fearing that they too might have ulterior motives. Sarah's therapist helped her work through these trust issues, encouraging her to take small steps toward rebuilding her faith in people. The process wasn't easy. Sarah knew that if she wanted to find love again, she had to learn to trust both herself and others, but it was hard to let go of the fear of being hurt again. Despite these challenges, Sarah didn't want to give up on the idea of finding true love. Deep down, she still believed that love could be a beautiful and fulfilling part of life, but she knew she needed time to heal before she could fully open her heart again. In the meantime, she focused on surrounding herself with supportive, genuine friends who cared about her well-being. Sarah also made a conscious decision to be more cautious in her future relationships. She set boundaries for herself, learning to recognize red flags and listen to her instincts. While she didn't want to live in fear, she understood that being more discerning would help her protect herself from future harm. Slowly, Sarah began to feel more confident in her ability to navigate relationships without losing herself or being manipulated again. One of the most difficult decisions Sarah faced was whether or not to take legal action against Kwami. Though she had been scammed, tracking down and holding him accountable seemed like a daunting task. Sarah wasn't sure if she had the strength or resources to go through the process of filing a police report, hiring a lawyer, and pursuing a case. However, after discussing the matter with her therapist and friends, Sarah realized that seeking justice might be an important part of her healing process. It wasn't just about the money she had lost, it was about standing up for herself and not letting Kwami get away with his actions. By pursuing legal action, Sarah hoped to prevent him from scamming other women in the future. With the support of her friends, Sarah gathered all the evidence she had: text messages, bank transfers, and screenshots of her conversations with Kwami. She reached out to a lawyer who specialized in fraud cases, and together they began the process of building a case against Kwami. It wasn't easy, and the legal system moved slowly, but Sarah was determined to see it through. Though she knew that the outcome was uncertain, Sarah found comfort in the fact that she was doing everything in her power to hold Kwami accountable. The process of taking legal action helped her reclaim a sense of control over her life, and even though it was emotionally taxing, it gave her a renewed sense of strength. In addition to the emotional toll the scam had taken on Sarah, the financial loss was significant. She had drained her savings to support Kwami's false business ventures, and now she was left with a pile of debt and a strained bank account. Rebuilding her financial stability became one of Sarah's top priorities as she worked to recover from the scam. Sarah knew she couldn't fix everything overnight, but she was determined to get back on her feet. She started by setting up a strict budget and cutting back on unnecessary expenses. Her fashion business, which had always been more of a passion project, now became a vital source of income. Sarah threw herself into her work, focusing on growing her client base and expanding her brand. At first it was slow going, but as Sarah began to regain her confidence, her business started to flourish. Her designs gained more attention and she began landing larger contracts with high-end clients. The income from her business allowed her to start paying off her debts, and she gradually rebuilt her savings. Sarah also educated herself on personal finance, determined to make smarter financial decisions in the future. She sought advice from financial planners and attended workshops on managing money and avoiding scams. By taking control of her finances, Sarah felt more empowered and secure in her future. Throughout her journey of healing and rebuilding, Sarah learned one of the most important lessons of her life. There is strength in vulnerability. For so long, she had believed that being vulnerable made her weak, that her desire for love had led her to make poor decisions. But through therapy and self-reflection, Sarah came to understand that vulnerability was not a flaw, it was part of what made her human. By embracing her vulnerability, Sarah was able to connect with others on a deeper level. She opened up about her experience, not only with close friends, but also with strangers who had gone through similar situations. In doing so, she found a sense of community and support that helped her heal. Sarah's story resonated with many people, especially women who had been victims of romance scams. Her willingness to share her experience allowed others to come forward and share their own stories. Together, they formed a network of support, helping each other navigate the emotional and financial fallout of being scammed. Though Sarah's journey was filled with pain, she emerged from it stronger and more self-aware. She had learned to trust herself again, to set boundaries, and to value her worth. And while the road to recovery was long, Sarah knew that she was capable of moving forward one step at a time.